I'm Leo, 32, a financial analyst who discovered my own parents secretly put $93,000 of debt in my name to fund my brother's lavish lifestyle. The betrayal nearly destroyed me financially and emotionally. Growing up in suburban Chicago in what I thought was a normal middle-class family, I never imagined my parents would commit identity theft against their own son. But after uncovering their fraud, I made the hardest decision of my life, one that would tear our family apart forever. Before I share how my own family nearly ruined my life, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button, and get ready for a story about family betrayal that'll make your jaw drop. Looking back now, the warning signs were always there, flashing like neon billboards. I somehow missed. I was the older brother, the responsible one who got decent grades and never caused trouble. My brother Carter, 3 years younger, was the undisputed golden child, athletic, charming, and blessed with the kind of natural charisma that made everyone adore him on sight. My parents, Michael and Barbara, made no secret of their preference. When I brought home my first straight-A report card in 8th grade, my mom glanced at it and said, "That's nice, Leo," before returning to preparing dinner. The very same week, Carter got a C+ on a math test, his first grade above a D all semester, and our parents took him out for ice cream to celebrate his improvement. They hung his test paper on the refrigerator for months. My report card never made it past the kitchen counter. I started working at 16 bagging groceries after school and on weekends. My parents insisted I needed to build character and learn the value of $1. Meanwhile, Carter focused exclusively on baseball and basketball. "He needs time to practice if he's going to get scouted," Dad would say. The possibility of sports scholarships was always the justification, even though Carter was good but nowhere near exceptional. When college application time came around, I managed to secure a partial academic scholarship to the state university. My parents' contribution, a set of used luggage, and $200 for textbooks. I had to take out modest student loans and work 20 hours a week at the campus bookstore to make ends meet. My apartment was a tiny studio, with questionable plumbing in the worst part of town. Carter, on the other hand, got accepted to Riverside University, a prestigious private college with tuition costs that made my eyes water. Despite only average grades and no significant sports recruitment, my parents didn't blink at covering his full tuition apartment in the best neighborhood near campus, and a monthly allowance that exceeded what I earned working 3 jobs. "He needs to focus on his studies and networking," Mom explained when I asked about the disparity. "You're just naturally more independent, Leo." I graduated with a degree in finance, landed an entry-level accounting position, and moved into a modest one-bedroom apartment with my girlfriend Sophia, whom I'd met in my final year of college. She worked as a nurse at the local hospital, and between our salaries we managed to live comfortably, if frugally. I maintained limited contact with my family during those early years of my career. Holiday visits, occasional phone calls, nothing more. Every few months, my parents would call asking for small loans for what they described as emergencies, a roof repair, car trouble, medical bills. I'd send a few $100s, feeling obligated despite our distant relationship. It wasn't until much later that I discovered these emergencies were actually expenses for Carter designer clothes, weekend trips with friends, and even payments for the luxury car my parents had bought him for his 21st birthday. "Your brother is going through a rough patch," my mother would say vaguely when I asked for updates. "He's trying to find his path." This pathfinding apparently involved a series of abandoned college majors and half-hearted attempts at various careers, none lasting more than a few months. Through it all, my parents supported him financially and emotionally in ways they'd never done for me. I accepted this as the natural order of our family. Carter was the star, I was the steady but unspectacular supporting character. I focused on building my own life, advancing in my career, and deepening my relationship with Sophia. When I proposed to her after 3 years together, my parents attended our engagement dinner, but spent most of the evening talking about Carter's plans to start a revolutionary tech business, despite having no background in technology. The real estate market in our area was heating up, and Sophia and I decided it was time to look into buying our first home. We'd been saving diligently, cutting expenses where we could, cooking at home instead of eating out, driving older vehicles, and foregoing expensive vacations. By my 30th birthday, we had accumulated what we thought was a respectable down payment. We scheduled an appointment with a mortgage broker, excited to take this next step in our life together. Little did I know that this routine financial meeting would uncover a betrayal so profound it would change the course of my life forever. There must be some mistake, I insisted, staring at the mortgage broker across his polished desk. I've never had a credit card with that bank, let alone maxed it out. Mark, the mortgage broker, adjusted his glasses and gave me a look of practiced sympathy. He'd clearly delivered bad news to clients before. I'm afraid the credit report is quite clear, Mr. Walker. You currently have 6 active credit cards, all near their limits, and 4 personal loans totaling just over $93,000 in debt. Your debt-to-income ratio makes you ineligible for the mortgage amount you requested. In fact, I'm surprised you qualified for any of these credit lines given your existing obligations. Sophia squeezed my hand so hard her nails left half-moon imprints in my palm. The confusion on her face mirrored my own internal chaos. We had been meticulously tracking our finances for years. The only debt we carried was the remainder of Sophia's student loans and a modest car payment. There was no way I had $93,000 in mystery debt. I need to see that report, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The pages Mark handed me painted a financial horror story. Credit cards opened in my name dating back to my sophomore year of college. Personal loans from banks I'd never set foot in. Addresses I recognized my parents' home, Carter's various apartments over the years. Most alarmingly, every account showed a perfect payment history until 6 months ago when they all began to show late payments. The spiral of delinquency had accelerated until the most recent month showed every account in serious arrears. I left the mortgage office in a daze, the credit reports clutched in my hand like evidence at a crime scene. Sophia drove us home as I made call after call to credit card companies and banks. Each conversation confirmed my growing suspicion. Yes, they had accounts in my name. Yes, the social security number matched mine. No, they couldn't share details about who had made the payments previously without a subpoena or court order. It has to be your parents, Sophia said quietly as we sat at our kitchen table that evening. Printouts of account statements spread before us like a paper trail of betrayal. Look at when these accounts were opened, exactly when they said Carter needed money for that baseball training camp, and this one right when they told us he needed to furnish his new apartment. I didn't want to believe it. Parents were supposed to protect their children, not steal their identities, but the evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. The applications had my personal information. Information only my immediate family would know. The earliest cards were opened while I was away at college, barely checking my credit report and trusting my mail to be forwarded appropriately. I called my parents that night, my voice shaking as I asked directly about the accounts. My father responded with dismissive irritation. "Leo, we're about to sit down to dinner with Carter. Can't this wait until tomorrow?" The casual mention of my brother's name while brushing off my financial crisis was the last straw. Without telling them my intentions, I drove the 3 hours to their suburban home the next morning, arriving unannounced on their doorstep. The shock on my mother's face when she opened the door quickly morphed into nervous hospitality. "Leo, what a surprise. Come in. Come in. I was just making coffee." My father emerged from his study, reading glasses perched on his nose. "Son, what brings you here on a weekday? Everything okay at work?" I slapped the credit reports down on their coffee table. "I need you to explain this. Now." The moment stretched between us, taut as a wire. My mother's eyes darted to my father, a silent communication passing between them. "We were going to tell you," my father finally said, removing his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Things got a bit out of hand." "A bit out of hand," I repeated, my voice rising. "There's $93,000 of debt in my name that I didn't create. That's not a bit out of hand. That's fraud." My mother flinched at the word. "Don't be so dramatic, Leo. It's just family helping family." What followed was the most surreal conversation of my life. With shocking calmness, my parents explained how they'd been opening credit accounts in my name since I was 19. First, it was for necessities for Carter, top-of-the-line sports equipment. His coaches insisted he needed private training sessions with former professional athletes, a laptop for school. Then came the luxury car for his 18th birthday because he needed reliable transportation to practice. Next were the European vacations during his college breaks because networking with the right people is essential in today's economy. The list went on the security deposit and rent for his apartment in the city's most exclusive neighborhood because appearances matter in business. Then the seed money for his tech startup idea that failed within months. Each expense justified as an investment in Carter's future, each dollar borrowed against my credit without my knowledge or consent. We always made the payments on time, my father explained, as if this somehow absolved them. It wasn't until Carter's last business venture fell through that things got tight. You had no right, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You stole my identity. My mother reached for my hand, which I pulled away. Sweetheart, we knew you wouldn't mind. You've always been so good with money, and Carter needed these opportunities to succeed. We were just balancing things out a little. You got those scholarships after all. Balancing things out, I stood up, unable to remain seated in the face of such twisted logic. I worked for those scholarships. I worked through college. I've been working 60-hour weeks for years to build my credit and save for a home, and you've destroyed all of that. Now you're being selfish, my father said, his tone hardening. Carter is struggling to find his path. You're established in your career. You have a good job. You can handle this setback. The expectation that I would simply absorb this massive financial blow to continue enabling my brother's consequence-free lifestyle was the final revelation. My parents had never seen me as a person with my own dreams and future. I was simply a resource to be tapped for their golden child. As I stood there in my childhood home, surrounded by framed photographs of Carter's sporting events and graduation, prominently displayed while mine sat in albums in the basement, the full weight of their betrayal crashed over me like a wave. This wasn't just about money. This was about a lifetime of being valued less, expected to give more, and now being stolen from by the very people who should have protected me. My hands shook as I gathered the credit reports, unsure what my next step would be, but absolutely certain of one thing: nothing in our family would ever be the same again. The days following my confrontation with my parents revealed layers of deception I hadn't imagined possible. With Sophia's support, I requested complete documentation from every financial institution involved. The packets arrived one by one, each containing fresh evidence of betrayal. My signature had been forged on countless documents, loan applications, credit card contracts, change of address forms. The handwriting was clearly my mother's attempt to mimic mine with its characteristic slant and looped letters. Some forms had been submitted online using my email address, an account I rarely checked that had been created during my college years. Even more disturbing was the discovery that my parents had been intercepting my mail for years. They had submitted change of address forms to redirect financial statements to a P.O. box they maintained. When I called the postal inspector to report this, he explained that this level of mail fraud was a serious federal offense. "Did your brother know about this?" Sophia asked one evening, as we sorted through the growing pile of evidence. The question had been haunting me. Had Carter been an innocent beneficiary of my parents' scheme or a willing participant I needed to know? We arranged to meet at a coffee shop halfway between our homes. Carter arrived 20 minutes late, dressed in designer clothes and reeking of expensive cologne. He slid into the booth across from me, with the easy confidence of someone who had never faced serious consequences. "So what's this emergency meeting about?" he asked, checking his phone. "Mom said you've been causing drama." I placed the credit report on the table between us. "Did you know about this?" Carter glanced at the document, then back at his phone, his expression unchanged. "Yeah. So, Mom and Dad helped me out with some expenses. What's the big deal?" The casualness of his response knocked the wind out of me. "The big deal is that it's fraud, Carter. They opened credit cards and took out loans in my name without my knowledge. I'm on the hook for $93,000. He shrugged, finally putting his phone down. "They always made the payments until recently. It's not like you were affected. But I am affected now. My credit is destroyed. Sophia and I can't buy a house. This debt is in my name. Look." Carter leaned forward, lowering his voice as if sharing wise advice. "You've always been good with money, right? You're the responsible one with the steady job and all that. This is just a bump in the road for you. You'll figure it out. Pay it off over time. No big deal. It's not my debt to pay off, I insisted. These were your expenses. Your car. Your apartment. Your failed businesses. Carter's expression hardened. Those were investments in my future. Mom and Dad understood that I needed certain advantages to succeed in today's competitive environment. Not everyone can be content with a boring accounting job and a basic life like you. The conversation deteriorated from there. Carter's sense of entitlement was breathtaking. In his mind, our parents' financial support, including the fraudulent use of my identity, was simply his due as the family's golden child. When I suggested he should take responsibility for at least some of the debt, he laughed outright. That's not how family works, Leo. We support each other. Mom and Dad supported me when I needed it. And now you can do your part. Honestly, you're being pretty selfish about this whole thing. I left the coffee shop with a clarity I hadn't expected. Carter wasn't just an innocent beneficiary. He was a willing participant in a family dynamic that had cast me as the workhorse, the reliable source of support and sacrifice, while he enjoyed the privileges and benefits. 3 days later, my parents called to invite Sophia and me to dinner. We want to talk this through as a family, my mother said, her voice carefully modulated to sound reasonable and concerned. We can find a solution that works for everyone. The dinner was a masterclass in manipulation. My mother cried on cue, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin as she lamented how her baby boy could turn on his family this way. After all we've done for you, she repeated, as if raising me had been some extraordinary act of charity rather than a parental obligation. My father took a different approach, his voice low and threatening. Family handles problems privately, Leo. Taking this outside our home would be a betrayal. None of us could forgive. Think very carefully about your next steps. When I asked directly how they planned to address the actual debt, their answers were vague. We'll help when we can, my father said. But you know our retirement funds are limited, and Carter still needs our support as he establishes himself. I left the dinner with a sickening realization they had no intention of making this right. In their minds, my financial ruin was an acceptable sacrifice for Carter's comfort. The calls and messages began that night and escalated over the following days. My mother alternated between tearful pleas about family loyalty and vicious attacks on my character and Sophia's influence. She's turned you against your real family, she texted at 3 a.m. My father's approach was more direct. You'll regret making enemies of the people who gave you life, he warned in a voicemail. Blood is thicker than water, son. Remember that. Through it all, Sophia remained my rock. This isn't about family loyalty, she told me, as we lay awake discussing our options. This is about criminal activity that's affecting our future. They made their choice when they stole your identity. Now you have to make yours. I was hesitating, torn between protecting my financial future and the ingrained reluctance to take action against my own parents when the final betrayal came. A letter arrived from a bank I'd never done business with, thanking me for my recent loan application. With growing horror, I called the bank to discover that a new loan for $25,000 had been submitted in my name just 3 days earlier, after I had confronted my parents about the existing fraud. They hadn't stopped. Despite being caught, despite knowing the devastation it had already caused me, they were continuing to steal my identity to fund their golden child's lifestyle. That night I made my decision. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about standing up for myself against a lifetime of being exploited by the people who should have loved and protected me most. Identity theft cases involving family members are more common than you might think, said Grace Thurman, the financial advisor Sophia had found through her hospital's employee assistance program. Her office was warm and inviting, at odds with the cold reality of our situation. But the amount involved here and the duration of the fraud is certainly on the extreme end. I had brought copies of all the documentation I'd gathered, credit reports, loan documents, evidence of mail forwarding the new fraudulent loan application. She reviewed them methodically, taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. What are my options? I asked, finally. Grace leaned back in her chair. Broadly speaking, you have 2 paths. You can try to handle this privately, work out a repayment plan with your parents. Get them to sign a formal agreement taking responsibility for the debt. Or you can report this as fraud, which would likely involve criminal charges against your parents. The second option made my stomach turn. Despite everything, the thought of my parents being arrested was almost unbearable. If I choose the first option, what happens to my credit? That's the problem, Grace said gently. Without filing fraud reports, these accounts remain legitimately yours in the eyes of creditors. The damage to your credit score would take years to repair, even with perfect payments going forward. She referred me to Lawrence Bennett, an attorney specializing in identity theft cases. His office was less comfortable than Grace's all steel and glass, with certificates covering the walls. Family identity theft cases are particularly challenging, Lawrence said after reviewing my documents. Courts understand the complications of prosecuting family members, but they also recognize that the financial damage is just as real whether the perpetrator is a stranger or your mother. I rubbed my temples, feeling the beginning of what had become a near-constant headache. What would happen to them? If I report this? Potentially prison time, Lawrence said matter-of-factly. The amount involved here constitutes grand larceny in most jurisdictions. Add in the mail fraud forgery, and the fact that they continued the behavior after being confronted, prosecutors would have a strong case. The thought of my parents in prison uniforms, sleeping in cells, eating institutional food, it was almost enough to make me reconsider. Almost. But here's what you need to understand, Lawrence continued, leaning forward across his desk. Without formal fraud reports, you will be legally responsible for all of this debt. That's $93,000 plus interest and late fees that you'll be paying off for decades. It will affect your ability to buy a home finance, a car, potentially even your insurance rates and employment opportunities in the financial sector. When he put it that way, the decision became clearer. This wasn't just about punishing my parents. It was about protecting my own future. The process began with police reports, detailed statements about each fraudulent account, when it was opened, how I discovered it. The detective assigned to my case, a middle-aged woman named Rivera, with tired eyes and a gentle manner, asked questions that made the reality of what I was doing sink in. Did your parents have access to your personal identification documents? When did you first become aware of the fraud? Did they admit to opening these accounts when confronted? Do you have any written evidence of their confession? Are you willing to testify against your parents in court, if necessary? Each question required me to verbally acknowledge my parents' crimes and my intention to hold them accountable. Each answer felt like another brick in a wall being built between my past and future. Filing the formal fraud charges was surreal. I sat in a government office signing affidavits stating that I had not authorized the accounts opened in my name, that I was not responsible for the charges incurred, that I was requesting criminal investigation into the matter. My signature on these documents, my actual signature, not my mother's forged approximation, set in motion a process that would forever change my family. The financial institutions responded with surprising efficiency once the fraud reports were filed. Credit freezes were placed on my accounts to prevent further identity theft. Investigations were opened into each fraudulent account. I spent hours on the phone providing additional documentation, answering questions, forwarding police report numbers. My parents' reaction was explosive. My mother called sobbing, almost incoherent with disbelief that I would put my own parents through this humiliation. My father's message was shorter and more direct. "You're no son of mine." Carter's response was predictably self-centered. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he yelled during a late-night call. "They're talking about pressing charges. The police came to their house. Everyone in the neighborhood saw. How could you do this to them, to me?" The fact that neither he nor my parents seemed to grasp that they had done something wrong, something illegal, was perhaps the most disturbing part of the whole ordeal. Extended family members began taking sides. My Aunt Linda, my mother's sister, called to tell me I was dead to the family for putting my saint of a mother through this nightmare. My father's brother Robert, however, reached out with unexpected support. "Your dad and I had a similar childhood," he told me during a long phone conversation. "Our parents always favored him, gave him everything. I recognized the pattern continuing with you and Carter, but I never imagined they'd go this far." "You're doing the right thing, Leo," Sometimes family needs firm boundaries. The social media harassment started soon after. Cousins the first barely spoke to posted vague but pointed comments about family traitors and ungrateful children. Carter's girlfriend wrote a lengthy post about supporting the people who raised you no matter what, which received dozens of sympathetic comments from mutual acquaintances. Through it all, Sophia remained steadfast. She fielded calls from her own family members who had heard rumors and wanted the real story. She sat with me through sleepless nights when the guilt became overwhelming. She reminded me again and again that I was the victim in this situation, not the villain. What kind of parents steal from their child, she would ask when my resolve weakened. What kind of brother accepts stolen money and then blames you for seeking justice? This isn't normal, Leo. This isn't what family is supposed to be. The initial court hearing was set for 3 months after I filed the reports. My parents hired Gerald Morrison, an expensive defense attorney known for handling white-collar crime cases. I recognized him from local news coverage of high-profile fraud cases. The evidence presentation was clinical and devastating. Financial records showing the systematic opening of accounts in my name. Mail forwarding documents with my mother's handwriting. Credit card statements showing purchases that aligned perfectly with Carter's activities and addresses. My parents sat at the defense table looking smaller and older than I remembered, as their actions were laid bare in the sterile language of legal procedure. When the judge ruled that there was sufficient evidence to proceed with the case, my mother began to cry quietly. My father stared straight ahead, his face a mask of stone. I felt a complex mixture of vindication and devastation watching the people who had raised me face the consequences of their actions. As I left the courtroom with Lawrence, he put a hand briefly on my shoulder. "The hardest part is done," he said. "Now we wait for the bank's investigations to conclude and see if your parents are willing to negotiate a plea agreement. Either way, your financial future is protected." Protected, yes. But at what emotional cost? That remained to be seen. The months following the initial hearing brought a slow but steady stream of letters from banks and credit card companies. One by one, they completed their fraud investigations and removed the debts from my credit report. Each letter represented a small piece of my financial identity being restored, the damage gradually undone. "Your credit score has already improved by 80 points, Sophia noted as we reviewed my latest credit report. We had made it a Sunday evening ritual, tracking the progress of my financial recovery over takeout dinner at our kitchen table. "It'll take time to fully recover, but you're moving in the right direction." Meanwhile, my parents were moving in a decidedly different direction. Their lawyer had initially been confident about fighting the charges, but as the evidence mounted and more financial institutions validated my fraud claims, the tone of their defense changed. Discussions of a plea bargain began. The terms were straightforward. My parents would admit guilt to reduce charges, avoid jail time through probation and community service, and take full financial responsibility for repaying all fraudulent debts. The alternative was to go to trial and risk more severe penalties, including potential incarceration. To meet these financial obligations, my parents were forced to sell their home, the house I'd grown up in with its carefully maintained garden, and the height marks for Carter and me penciled on the kitchen doorframe. They moved into a small apartment on the other side of town, far from their friends and social circle. Carter, cut off from his financial supply line, had to downgrade from his luxury apartment to a shared rental with 2 roommates. According to my Uncle Robert, who still kept me updated despite family pressure to cut contact, Carter had finally taken a regular job at a marketing firm, his first steady employment in years. The process of rebuilding my financial life continued in parallel with the unraveling of my family relationships. Sophia and I had to postpone our home buying plans indefinitely. Our wedding, originally planned as a modest but nice affair, was scaled back to a simple ceremony with just close friends and Sophia's family. The emotional toll was harder to quantify than the financial one. I began seeing a therapist, Dr. Andrea Maxwell, who specialized in family estrangement and betrayal trauma. "What you're experiencing is a complex grief," she explained during one of our sessions. "You're mourning the loss of the family you thought you had, the parents you deserved but never actually existed. That's a profound loss, even if the relationship was always flawed." The therapy sessions helped me recognize patterns I'd never fully acknowledged before. How I had internalized my role as the less valued child. How I had accepted scraps of attention and approval, while Carter feasted at the table. my parents' unconditional love. How I had continued seeking their approval well into adulthood, sending money when asked, never questioning their treatment of me. Family dynamics like these don't develop overnight, Dr. Maxwell said. The identity theft was an extreme manifestation of a pattern that was established when you were very young. Your parents saw you as the strong, self-sufficient one who didn't need support, and your brother as the vulnerable one who couldn't survive without their help. Neither perception was accurate or fair to either of you. I found unexpected solace in an anonymous online support group for people estranged from family members. Reading others' stories of toxicity, betrayal, and the difficult journey to establishing boundaries helped normalize my experience. I began contributing to the forum, first responding to others' posts, then eventually sharing my own story. "You're not alone in this," wrote one respondent. "My mother emptied my college fund to pay for my sister's wedding. Different circumstances, same message, you matter less. But that's their failure, not yours." With Dr. Maxwell's encouragement, I started a private blog documenting my experience and the recovery process. It became therapeutic for me and surprisingly helpful to others in similar situations. I received messages from people facing family identity theft who had found strength in my story to take action themselves. My professional life took an unexpected turn as well. The experience had given me first-hand knowledge of financial fraud that proved valuable in my field. I enrolled in specialized courses on fraud detection and prevention, earning certifications that opened new career opportunities. There's a growing need for professionals who understand both the financial and emotional aspects of fraud, my manager told me during a performance review. Your personal experience combined with your technical skills makes you uniquely qualified in this area. As my professional confidence grew, I found myself establishing firmer boundaries in all areas of my life. I became more selective about friendships, more assertive about my needs, more protective of my time and energy. Sophia noticed the change before I did. "You stand taller now," she observed one evening. "You take up more space. It's like you finally believe you deserve to be here as much as anyone else." The contrast between my growth and Carter's situation became increasingly apparent. 6 months after my parents' plea deal, he reached out via email, the first direct contact since his angry phone call. "Things are tough right now," he wrote. "I'm having trouble making rent. I know we've had our differences, but family is family. Could you help me out just this once?" The old Leo might have sent money out of guilt or a desperate hope for reconciliation. The new Leo recognized the familiar pattern of exploitation and responded with a simple, "No, I can't do that," before blocking his email address. 2 weeks later, I learned from Uncle Robert that Carter had approached various extended family members for loans using the same family helps family rhetoric our parents had employed. Most had declined, having witnessed the consequences of my parents' enabling. "He's having to grow up at 30, learning lessons most of us figured out at 20, Uncle Robert said. "It's painful to watch, but necessary." As the 1-year anniversary of my discovery of the fraud approached, I received a letter from my mother, handwritten on the floral stationery she'd always favored. It was full of carefully worded non-apologies. "We're sorry you felt hurt by our actions, and we never meant for things to turn out this way." There was no acknowledgement of the crime they had committed, no recognition of the trust they had violated. The letter ended with a hope that we could put this unfortunate misunderstanding behind us and be a family again. I read it once, then placed it in a folder with the other documentation of their betrayal. I had no intention of responding. Some bridges once burned cannot and should not be rebuilt. The court's final judgment came down exactly 13 months after I first discovered the fraudulent accounts. My parents were sentenced to 3 years of probation, 200 hours of community service each, and full restitution of all debts incurred in my name. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, made it clear that they were receiving leniency only because of their age and lack of prior criminal record. "The court takes a very dim view of identity theft under any circumstances," she stated during the sentencing. "The fact that the victims were your own child adds a troubling dimension to these crimes. You violated not just financial trust, but the fundamental trust between parent and child." My parents sat stiffly as she spoke, my mother occasionally dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. My father stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. I watched from the back of the courtroom, having decided to attend, but not wishing to be prominently visible. The financial settlement was substantial. In addition to the original $93,000 in fraudulent debt, they were responsible for accumulated interest, late fees, and my legal costs. To meet these obligations, they liquidated their retirement accounts and took out a mortgage on their new condominium, ironically putting themselves in debt to free me from the debt they had created in my name. Carter, finally facing the reality of life without financial support, took a second job waiting tables on weekends to supplement his entry-level marketing salary. According to Uncle Robert, he was sharing a 2-bedroom apartment with 3 other people and driving a 10-year-old Honda Civic, a far cry from the luxury lifestyle he had enjoyed throughout his 20s. He's angry, Uncle Robert told me over coffee one Saturday. Blames you for their financial problems. Blames them for giving in and pleading guilty. Blames everyone but himself. But he's working steadily for the first time in his life, so that's something. I had maintained my decision to have no contact with my parents, returning their occasional letters unopened. The choice was painful, but necessary for my own well-being. Dr. Maxwell had helped me understand that forgiveness didn't necessarily mean reconciliation. You can forgive someone, release the active anger and resentment without allowing them back into your life, she explained. Forgiveness is something you do for yourself. Trust is something they would need to earn. And they haven't shown any genuine understanding of the harm they caused. Extended family members who had initially condemned my actions began reaching out with tentative apologies. Aunt Linda, who had been among the most vocal critics, called one evening with a very different tone than her previous communications. I didn't know the whole story, she admitted. Your mother. She has always been selective about what information she shares. I should have asked more questions before judging you. I accepted these overtures with caution, establishing clear boundaries about what topics were open for discussion. My parents and their situation remained off limits. Those who couldn't respect this boundary quickly found themselves limited to holiday card exchanges rather than active relationships. Sophia and I moved forward with our delayed plans. We had a small but meaningful wedding ceremony in a local park surrounded by true friends and supportive family members. In lieu of traditional family roles in the ceremony, I asked Uncle Robert to stand as my best man, a recognition of the unexpected support he had provided throughout the ordeal. The financial recovery process continued steadily. With the fraudulent accounts removed from my credit report and a year of careful financial management, we qualified for a modest mortgage on a small 2-bedroom house in a developing neighborhood. It wasn't the home we had originally envisioned, but walking through the door with our own keys felt like a victory nevertheless. My career advancement accelerated as I leveraged my personal experience and additional certifications. The bank's fraud detection division offered me a specialist position with significantly higher compensation and growth potential. The irony wasn't lost on me. My parents' crimes had inadvertently opened a new professional path. Around 18 months after the court judgment, Carter reached out again, this time suggesting we meet in person. Against Sophia's better judgment, I agreed to coffee at a neutral location. The change in his appearance was striking. The designer clothes and carefully styled hair had been replaced by a more subdued, conventional look. He seemed thinner, more subdued, but also somehow more substantial. I've been doing a lot of thinking, he said after our initial awkward greetings. Therapy, actually. Part of the probation requirements for Mom and Dad was family counseling, and the therapist suggested I continue with individual sessions. He stirred his coffee, unnecessarily avoiding eye contact. I'm starting to understand some things about our family that I never saw before. How they set us up in these roles from the beginning. The golden child and the scapegoat. Classic narcissistic family structure, apparently. I remained guarded, having heard promising starts from Carter before, only to be disappointed. What exactly are you hoping to get from this meeting? He flinched slightly at my directness. Not money, if that's what you're thinking. I'm doing okay now. Promotion at work. Dating someone who actually has a job and pays her own bills, which is new for me. He attempted a self-deprecating smile. I guess I wanted to see if there's any way forward for us. As brothers, I mean. Not expecting to go back to how things were just. Something better than nothing. The conversation that followed was the most honest we'd ever had. Carter acknowledged for the first time how he had benefited from our parents' favoritism and how he had participated in exploiting me. I shared how the lifelong pattern had affected me, culminating in the identity theft, but beginning much earlier. We agreed to very limited contact moving forward. Occasional texts, perhaps coffee every few months. No financial entanglements. No discussing my boundaries with our parents. No pressure for family reunification. It was a tentative first step on a long, uncertain road. As I drove home, I realized that Carter's growth, limited though it might be, represented something important. The unhealthy family system that had shaped all of us was breaking down. Through pain and consequence, new patterns were emerging. Whether they would lead to healing relationships remained to be seen, but the toxic status quo had been irrevocably disrupted. That night, I added a new entry to my recovery blog. Family systems resist change. They will fight to maintain their equilibrium, even when that balance is destructive. Sometimes it takes an explosion, a complete rupture, to create space for something healthier to grow. I don't know yet what new growth will emerge from the scorched earth of my family relationships, but for the first time I'm curious rather than fearful about the possibilities. 2 years after discovering the fraud that upended my life, I stood in the backyard of our newly purchased home watching Sophia arrange flowers on the patio table for our housewarming gathering. The modest but comfortable 3-bedroom house represented more than just property ownership. It was tangible proof of our recovery and resilience. My credit score had rebounded to the excellent range after all fraudulent accounts were removed and 2 years of careful financial management. The restitution payments from my parents had been consistently arriving each month, administered through the court system, so no direct contact was necessary. We had used this money exactly as intended, to repair the damage they had caused, not to fund a lifestyle beyond our means. Sophia and I had married in a small ceremony the previous spring, surrounded by genuine friends and family members who had proven their loyalty through the crisis. Our relationship had deepened through the adversity, developing a rock-solid foundation of trust and mutual support that made even ordinary moments feel significant. "Uncle Robert's here," Sophia called from inside the house. Robert had become a regular presence in our lives, the one blood relative who had maintained steady support throughout the ordeal. He entered carrying a potted plant and a bottle of champagne, his face breaking into a genuine smile as he embraced us both. "Beautiful place," he said, looking around appreciatively. "You've done well for yourselves." Over barbecue and cold drinks, our small gathering of friends and chosen family celebrated not just our new home, but the journey that had brought us here. These were people who had stood by us when others had fallen away, who had offered support without judgment, who had helped us redefine what family truly meant. Through occasional updates from Uncle Robert, I maintained a distant awareness of my parents' circumstances. They had downsized again to an even smaller apartment, both working part-time jobs to supplement their reduced retirement funds. Their social circle had contracted significantly after the public nature of their legal troubles. They still spoke of the situation as something that had happened to them, rather than something they had caused, a narrative that Uncle Robert found frustrating but unsurprising. "Your father still introduces the topic with 'when Leo turned against us,'" he told me during a quiet moment on the patio. "They've constructed an entire reality where they're the victims of your ingratitude rather than the perpetrators of a crime." I had long since stopped expecting any genuine recognition or remorse from them. Dr. Maxwell had helped me understand that for some people, particularly those with narcissistic tendencies, maintaining their self-image was more important than any relationship, even with their children. True accountability would require them to confront a reality where they aren't the perfect parents they've always believed themselves to be, she had explained. Some people simply aren't capable of that level of self-reflection, especially later in life. Carter's evolution had been more substantial, if still limited. Our occasional coffee meetings had continued, gradually becoming more comfortable as we established a new relationship based on adult equality rather than our old family roles. He had maintained steady employment, received another promotion, and moved in with his girlfriend, normal life milestones that had been delayed by years of enabling and entitlement. "He asked about you yesterday," Uncle Robert mentioned. "Wanted to know if you'd be open to him calling you sometime." "Not for the gathering today," he added quickly, seeing my expression. just in general. I considered this as I watched our friends laughing together across the yard. Maybe. I'll think about it. My work in the fraud detection division had evolved into a specialization in family financial abuse cases. I occasionally spoke at financial literacy workshops, sharing an anonymized version of my experience to help others recognize warning signs I had missed. These presentations always included resources for both practical financial recovery and emotional support. The therapy I had begun as crisis management had developed into a valuable ongoing resource for personal growth. Dr. Maxwell and I had transitioned from weekly sessions focused on trauma to monthly check-ins centered on building healthy relationships and establishing strong boundaries in all areas of my life. What you experienced is what therapists call a complex trauma, she explained during one session. It wasn't a single event, but a lifelong pattern of emotional neglect punctuated by a severe betrayal. Recovery isn't linear, and it doesn't have a clear endpoint. It's more about building a different relationship with the experience, integrating it into your life story without letting it define you. This perspective helped me process the lingering guilt that occasionally surfaced, especially around holidays or family milestones. Part of me still questioned whether I had done the right thing, whether there might have been a less drastic way to address the situation. Dr. Maxwell encouraged me to examine these thoughts without judgment. Second guessing is normal, she assured me. It reflects your capacity for empathy, even toward people who harmed you. The question isn't whether you could have found another solution. It's whether they gave you any other option. When framed that way, the answer was clear. My parents had continued their fraudulent behavior, even after being confronted. They had shown no remorse, offered no meaningful restitution, and expected me to simply absorb the financial damage to maintain their preferred family narrative. The consequences they faced were the direct result of their own choices, not my decision to protect myself. Our support group for family estrangement had become another important part of my healing journey. What had begun as a place to seek validation had evolved into a community where I could offer guidance to others, just beginning the painful process of establishing boundaries with toxic family members. The hardest thing to accept is that the parents you deserved and the parents you had are not the same people I wrote in a response to a new member struggling with guilt. Mourning the family you should have had is a necessary part of building the life you actually want. As evening fell on our housewarming gathering, Sophia and I stood together in our kitchen watching through the window as our friends chatted on the patio under strings of soft lights. The home we had created felt like a physical manifestation of the life we were building. Warm, welcoming, and secure, but with clear boundaries about who was invited in. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if they hadn't gotten caught? Sophia asked, leaning her head against my shoulder. If we'd somehow found a way to get approved for that first mortgage without discovering the fraud. I considered this alternate timeline briefly. They would have continued. The debt would have grown. Eventually it would have collapsed anyway, probably when they died, and suddenly I was legally responsible for everything. The only difference is that it would have been even more devastating, and I would have lost even more years to their exploitation. She nodded thoughtfully. So in a strange way, discovering it when you did was actually the best possible outcome. I think so, I agreed. It forced a reckoning that was probably inevitable, and it taught me something important that I might never have learned otherwise. What's that? Real family is defined by respect and trust, not by blood, I said, watching our chosen family enjoying the home we had built. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself, and ultimately for others, is to establish consequences for harmful behavior, even when it's painful. As we rejoined our guests, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the hard-won wisdom of the past 2 years. The journey had been brutal at times, the losses significant. But standing in our backyard surrounded by people who genuinely cared for us, I knew that I had broken a generational pattern of dysfunction. Whatever family I might create in the future would be built on healthier foundations than the one I had been born into. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed me financially had ultimately freed me emotionally. By facing the truth about my family and taking difficult but necessary action, I had reclaimed not just my credit score, but my sense of self-worth. That I realized was the most valuable recovery of all. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision that hurt in the short term, but protected you in the long run? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you or might help someone you know, please hit that like button and share it with others. Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family challenges and finding strength in unexpected places. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that sometimes the hardest boundaries to set are the ones that ultimately lead to the most healing.